Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have the discussions that inform, entertain, and empower educators to be the change. I'm your host, Dr. Will, and this is my third show of this morning, people. I am here today with Don Wettrick. How are you doing, Don?
Apparently not hustling as much as you are, my friend.
Hey, but see, you playing on a different playing field, you know. Hey, thanks again for being a guest on the show. Today, people, we're going to be talking about starting that podcast. Hopefully, you've been listening to mine, and I've been providing some great content for you. But there are a lot of other podcasts out there. People are doing some great work. Don has his StartEdUp podcast, and I'm going to let him get into what it is. It's a very interesting take on the educational podcast. And so, Don, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Don Wettrick. I'm a innovation coordinator at Noblesville High School. We have an innovation class there, and I have a podcast. And yeah, like you said, it's called StartEdUp. It's a podcast where a lot of times our focus in the innovation class, the innovation, if it's great, usually becomes entrepreneurial. So a lot of our guests, well, darn near all of our guests are usually in the entrepreneurial arena. Sometimes they're authors. But I wanted people's opinion outside of education to talk about education. So it's kind of a different slant for sure.
Awesome. So I'm just going to jump in and ask you, of all of the podcast topics, directions that you could have taken, why choose to interview business leaders, thought leaders who work outside of education about their ideas of education?
I guess, first of all, just for a different opinion, there's a lot of people in the educational arena that we've heard from, and that's cool, and I like their opinions. But it seems, though, that the education is not moving as fast as the speed of business. And so a lot of times it's those business leaders, it's those entrepreneurs that I'm like, I want to pick their brain. Because if it's my job to prepare my students for the future, the people that usually have the most insight into the future are the people that are moving the business world. And the academics, I'll leave that to, other people. I value their opinion too, but that's why I just thought this would be a neat podcast for differing opinions. And oftentimes my guests didn't like school. They liked learning, but they didn't like school very much. And so I'm like, okay, so how do we do that? What would that look like? And so for those reasons, I went for those kind of people. And not that I'm trying to, preach to a choir, but hearing from these quote unquote bad kids who have turned out to be really successful, I wanted to pause and think, okay, what can we extrapolate from this? How could we, take their lessons and move forward? So it's made some people mad too. Don't get me wrong. It's made some people really mad at me, but oh well.
Okay, so how do you come up with your ideas for your shows, and how do you sort of think of your guests? Are they referral based, or is it something where you go, well, I've read something about this person and I really would like them on my show?
It's all of those. So my first round of guests probably were people that either I knew well or owed me a favor. I had some people that if the interview went well, then at the end or off air, I'd say, hey man, thank you so much for joining us, blah, blah, blah. I really appreciate this. Hey, who do you think I should have on? And instead of saying, hey, I know that you know this guy, and heck, sometimes I didn't even know who they knew. But I'm like, who else do you think would be a really good, a story? And they're like, oh, you know who you should have on next? I'll send them an email. And okay. So a lot of it was that. not all of them. And some of them were just shameless DMs like, hey, I saw your blog on blah, 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 or I read your book on so-and-so. Really would like to have you on a podcast. And, you know, I get my share of no responses, but, you know, we've had some pretty interesting yeses along the way. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, you have some awesome guests, and you know I've been listening to them on iTunes. I haven't checked. It is interesting because you know yesterday morning I was getting ready and I was listening to with Gary V's people, and I'm listening. I'm going, okay, yeah. Woo! But it did. Do you, and I bring this up to say, you know, in my interviews, I've yet to have someone go there with me. But do you ever sit down with your guests to say, okay, these are some of the parameters of how the conversation will go? So you just let it roll as it rolls.
Yes. Yeah. Matter of fact, my first few interviews, you can tell that I was waiting to ask my questions and I wasn't really listening to the conversation. And then after a while, I still do prep, but I may only have one question in mind and I just let it go from there. Now, sometimes I want to gently steer it back. But the raw and unfiltered is what I'm going for. I mean, like the next one is Gary V. If you think that Gary V's crew was bad, Gary is Gary, and he's opinionated and he's passionate and he likes the F word. I mean, in some ways, I know that like there's some students out there that I can't recommend it to. However, I appreciate his rawness, his honesty. Some people have been a little bit more filtered and some people haven't. Either way, no, I don't. I don't try to steer them in any one direction. So yeah.
Okay. Now, since starting your podcast, have you had any reservations? Were you cautious at all?
Yes.
And sorting, you know, doing what you do because you know we're both employed by school districts.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know. Now I know my boss has seen a couple of my shows, and some coworkers, you know, our network admin is like, "When are you going to be on my show?" And I'm like, "You watch my show?" It's like, "Yeah, I've seen." So y'all are cool, but I don't know if the superintendent has watched it or not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, do I have a little fear of? No, not really. I mean, one, I'm doing this from my house. Two, you know, these opinions may or may not express the views of Don Wettrick. Three, I think that these conversations have to be had. So, and then not even the superintendent. I mean, I've had one particular guest that I've never gotten such strongly worded emails saying that I had on a complete jerk and I should be ashamed of myself and he has no business talking about education and how dare you. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some people that there was one particular guest that I don't even know if I want to talk about that I said no to. And then I talked to a couple people and they're like, why did you say no? That was stupid. But this particular guest had so much past that I didn't feel like it was worth it. But, you know, I think that if you're not making a few people upset, then you're not doing it right. Or at least when you're challenging them to think. I mean, I don't know.
Okay. And so now I want to get to your guest, since you just brought this up.
Yeah.
And the normal educational, I guess, podcast circuit, if you will, we have our own superstars, you know, in our field. And I've had, I guess, a couple on. Normally, the people I actually reach out to are people that I think can bring something valuable to other educators who are listening, where they can kind of go, oh, this is not only sort of enlightens me, helps me with my mental shift, or I can take this and go back to my classroom and try this. you in your podcast have been able to get what would be considered an A-lister in any field. Dude, how do you make that happen, man? I mean, you know, I'm looking at your stuff. I'm seeing Amy Wilkerson and Seth Golden, the man with the socks, and you just talked about Gary V. Like you have these headliners on your show, and I know earlier you say, you know, you started here, got a little referral, but
right.
How does this thing keep going and the momentum build?
You should see some of the names I have coming out later. I mean, there's one in particular that I can't say who it is, but if I gave you 3 guesses, you'd guess who it is. You know, as far as like what is maybe the biggest name in entrepreneurialism that teachers would know. I've got him coming up. I've only got a verbal commitment out of him. So I'm hesitant to say yet, but how did it start? I mean, a long time ago, I probably got to give credit where credit's due. Daniel Pink, which I guess that episode's still yet to come out. I've recorded that, but a long time ago, Dan, I started this class and wrote him and said, "Hey, I'm basing this whole class off of your TED Talk." And he got back with us, and it kind of developed into a nice relationship. And so he endorsed my book, and that opened doors. And then some other things that we've just done, like when Dan says it's cool, some people think that that's cool. And then other things have just been like using it in the classroom. I mean, I think the other thing, like when we got to hold like Tim Ferriss, we got a hold of Tim because he liked the fact that like we were in class, we were doing the things that we're saying that we should do in education. You know, people say, "Oh, we should innovate." Okay, what does that look like? What does that mean? Students should be more entrepreneurial. Okay, that's cool. So when I'm like, "Hey, at Tim Ferriss, check out what we're doing," he looked at it. Well, actually, you know what? That's the start. That's the actual start. We interviewed Tim and in the class. And so I invited some other teachers and I asked around like, "Hey, if anybody wants to be a part of this Skype, let me know." And teachers didn't know who Tim Ferriss was, like at all. And like Tim Ferriss is probably one of the biggest names in entrepreneurialism, period. And so I thought, man, that's the problem. Like if you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, you probably don't know who Peter Diamandis is. You may not know who, you know, some of these other people that I like, Naveen Jain, Tom Bilyeu. I mean, these people that I really, really, really look up to. And most teachers are like, "I've never heard of those people in my life." And that was like, okay, I should. And actually, because I interviewed Tim, people are like, "Man, if you can get a hold of these people, why don't you have a podcast?" So technically that's how it started. But then, you know, we posted that we had an interview with Tim, and then other people are like, "Oh, well, if you're interviewing Tim, you should interview me." And that's the same way with James Altucher. You know, when I announced that I was going to go out to New York and interview Gary, James, who we'd had some back and forth emails, he's like, "Hey, if you're going to be out here, come to my show." So it's kind of that social signaling. But I mean, I guess like literally it started by just reaching out to people like Tim and working your way up.
Wow. And James has an interesting podcast himself.
James is an amazing podcast. Yeah.
So I'm like, wow, you know, because at first, you know, when I saw this stuff coming through LinkedIn and I'm looking at your guests, I'm like, like, how is this? I'm like, this is insane. You know, and then you talk about Daniel, which by the way, Daniel, I sent you a tweet asking you to be a guest on my podcast. And I don't know if you remember, Daniel, but you remember you did some videos way back in the day. I was in both of your videos, you know, so you can come on my show.
Come on now.
And, you know, make it happen around here. So how has, you mentioned some educators have not been sort of cheerleading some of your guests, but overall, how has the response been in the educational community?
It's a tough sell. And here's why. Actually, that was something I talked to about with Gary off air, is that I'm trying to hit a really weird market. So, and it's by no fault of their own on the teacher side, because a lot of teachers in far too many schools, they're still worried about their jobs in the field of high stakes testing. So the last thing on their mind is innovation. Then you've got the schools that are fooling themselves into think that they're doing a great job by preparing kids because they have high SAT scores. And I'm the furthest thing from their mind, because they're like, we don't need that. We've got our kids go to fill in your favorite high level college. So then right there, usually in the middle or at the bottom end, because the schools that are seeing that they don't need to worry about all subservient stuff, like you shouldn't be proud of just like your lack of expulsions. Or I always scratch my head on how many, like, well, our graduation rate is high. Don't get me wrong, that's cool, but what are they doing after graduation? Just simply getting them out the door isn't necessarily like just the be all end all of the measurability. So a lot of these schools, they have no interest in innovation. But the ones that do, I'm hearing back from those people. Now, here's the problem. That's not enough people. So I'm hearing back more from, ironically enough, more entrepreneurs, because they see what I met. That's why I'm kind of growing. My numbers are not parents of students that want to do more, that their son or daughter doesn't have this kind of class. Parents that want to see their kids that like they have other interests other than just academia, those things are going up. Entrepreneurs are seeing what we do and like, I see what you're doing. That's cool. Their numbers are going up. Actual teachers, I'm trying to crack that code. Will, I'm trying to crack that code. But again, this is why I'm sounding alarm. Now, I did take a really nice phone call and she meant really well. And actually, I see her point. She called me. She's like, hey, I just want to let you know that I hope I'm not going to try to swear too bad, but she's like, you're coming off a little bit like an asshole. And I said, okay, why is that? And she's like, you're so angry about some things in education that we can't control. You need to check your attitude. And she's right. And I was glad that she gave me that honest feedback. But what my passion is, and what I'm upset about, is that people don't see how fast things are moving. Now, mind you, education's changed in the last 5 years. I mean, because of people like Schrodinger and like, hey, get out your cell phones. It's okay to get on social media. That's moving the needle, but the needle is moving so faster at everything else. And so I keep talking to kid after kid after kid that is done with the college and they have a $200,000 of debt. And they can't get hired because they don't have any actual skills. They can write a good essay and they can take a test, but skills, they're lacking. And so I'm a little bit angry that we're not taking a hard look, because every single person I talk to in growth areas, they said there's two things that we look for. The two most valued things that we look for are creativity and innovation. And they're like, we're trying to talk to some of these college kids and we're like, hey, our competition's starting to catch up with us. What do you think that we should do? What do you want me to do? And they're like, no, we needed some really cool ideas. We need to differentiate our product. Can I have a beanbag chair? And they're like, no, we the most valuable commodity is the time to innovate and for our kids to create something out of nothing. We don't offer that. So while I understood that I was coming across angry, sometimes I am. And I'm hoping we start changing things now. I'm hoping it's podcasts like yours. You're starting to move the needle. I enjoy your conversations. I just like people starting to talk about why we do. And really that Seth Godin episode I did, I'm saying this lovingly, he was borderline mean. He was like, wake up. And it's more of those conversations that I'm hoping the teachers will listen to lovingly and know that I'm not attacking, but I'm trying to help.
Well, thank you for listening, to my show. I appreciate it. I think, your ideas and your frustrations, I share the same, but as that teacher said before, we can't control that these states or the federal government has says this is what determines what a successful school is. And no one in any state wants to have their school taken over by the state because they did poorly.
Right.
And what that has done is, instead of people sort of, being innovative and really looking at the current job market, or looking at the flat, as Tom Friedman said, the world is flat. Instead of them looking at that, they are looking at, hey man, if I don't pass this test, if we don't have so much growth, we don't have so many students passing these, we don't earn so many points, our schools get taken over, we lose funding, and that has caused a race to teaching to the test. I mean, literally people, hey, they're scared, man. And particularly if you are in a Title I school somewhere,
yeah,
they're not trying to.
But the thing is, the reason why I love podcasts and videos and things like this, we have seen time and time again, a story changes everything. We didn't really care about the Syrian refugee crisis until there was a story of a young child washing up on the beach. Stories transform. And so it is up to the people that really want to change to keep creating the stories. Shameless plug, I'm going to be doing daily videos from my classroom, because I don't want, there's so many people that are talking about we should innovate. Okay, what does that mean? It's confusing. I want to show what students are doing, so other schools can go, that wasn't that hard. We could do that. Otherwise, because if we wait around for the government, you're right. You're right. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen too slow. But I think that if we have some daring teachers doing some 20% time, Genius Hour, whatever, at the elementary, middle school levels, if we have more high schools that are willing to do an innovation class as like kind of an experimental curriculum, you're going to see the needle moved a lot faster. I know it. And I'm not trying to say Genius Hour and innovation class is the answer to education, but it's a big part of the solution. And I think that's the credibility that I want to build, is that it's not just me that feels it. It's Seth, it's Grant, it's Amy. I mean, it's these people that are Naveen. It's people like, yes, this is the way. This is the way you start moving mountains, because these successful kids you always hear about on NBC News, all these things that they're usually doing stories on are their stories despite school, not because. And I want that time to be in the school day more and more and more. And that's not to say that I don't like grassroots, awesome foundational education. I'm not asking you to replace your math curriculum. I'm not asking you to throw out your social studies curriculum. I'm asking you to enhance it. Foundational education, you cannot be innovative if you don't know how to read, right? So allow some time in the day for them to be innovative. Now, the hard part is if your grades 6 and up, this is so difficult because you have beaten it out of them. If you start from first grade and said, hey, we're going to have a Genius Hour, those kids will run with it, proven. But if you start this in 8th grade, when you said, hey, you have some free time to innovate, they'll just look at you. They'll look at their phone. They'll swipe. They won't. It's hard. It's hard work. So that's why if you really want to do this for sustainability, you start from first grade. And if you really want to roll up your sleeves, you can still do it with middle school and high school kids. It's just, it takes a little time. It takes a little time.
Cool. So I have a couple of more questions for you before we go. But the one I want to ask you now is, what, in doing your show thus far, what have you learned from your guests about their insights in education and where we are sort of lacking? And how have you then taken that information and used that in your own practice in your classroom?
No, the number one thing I've learned is you should absolutely long for the failure. You should go try things that are so stupid crazy, because either way, it's going to work out. If it fails, you're like, dude, I should have done this. The guy that is not afraid to go out in the middle of the dance floor, everybody else is like making fun of him, but then they are a little jealous of him. Go out there, do it, learn from it, embrace it. Because the people that know that also like, you're like, hey, I'm going to start this business, I'm going to do this thing. Even the people that are laughing at you will still stand back and go quietly to themselves, like, that's pretty cool. So I embraced this in my own class. Matter of fact, this is one of the things that this was our first week back. And I asked them all, I'm like, what are you passionate about? What do you love? And we went around and talked about things they loved. And I said, okay, what are you doing about it? Well, I love to help people. Okay. Well, I like to connect with others. Okay. What are you doing about it? Well, I guess sometimes I talk to my friends. That's not doing. What are you doing? Because the saddest thing is most people, when you ask them what they're passionate about, they're passionate about somebody else's dream. What are you passionate about? Oh, I love the Colts. Oh, I love the 76ers. Oh, I love this band. I love this movie. Somebody else's dream, somebody else's dream, somebody else's dream. You're watching life. So I'm telling my students, what are you doing? Do. If you do, you're going to be happier. You're going to inspire others to action. And when they inspire others to action, that's when you start transforming that whole school.
Awesome. Awesome. So here's the last question before we go. For those who they watch your show, they watch mine, they watch Cult of Pedagogy, and now they're inspired. Okay. They want a podcast. They say they have a voice. What is your advice for them to discovering their own voice?
Yeah. No, exactly. So honestly, this is what I reached out. So when I started to get to know Dan, I said, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book. Where should I start? He says, don't start writing a book, write a blog. See how people respond to you. So if you're thinking about podcasting, ask to be a guest on a podcast. Because if all of a sudden you get into that flow and all of a sudden like the host was like, okay, yeah. If you've got something interesting to say, it'll be abundantly clear. And then you should know that you should do a podcast. I do not recommend necessarily to like start investing in a microphone and all this other stuff. You might want to be a guest first, or I'm going to contradict myself, and I'm not a paid spokesperson but you should get the Anchor app, Anchor.fm. It's on the iOS Play Store, whatever. You can get out your phone, press record. It is a 24-hour podcast. It's like the Snapchat of podcasting. If you want to archive it, you can you can create an iTunes account on your phone, and then you can have a regular podcast. It even has a feature where it lets you use your phone to dial people, and you can have a call-in show. So you can just be like, literally, you pick up your phone and say, welcome back, everybody. This is Don Wettrick. It started up on the Anchor edition. Today, we're going to talk to Dr. Will, and I can press it live right here, from right here, and it's done. So if you just want to dip your toe into the pool and you want to invest $0, get Anchor. And then sometimes you're in the car and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got an idea. This is going to blow up. Get out your phone, talk into your phone, press send, you're done. Anchor FM.
Awesome. That's nice. I may have to try that with myself.
You do. It's awesome, Will.
Do it
and make sure you let me know.
I'm going to try that out for real. Now, I haven't bought a lot of equipment because normally, this is low tech. I do this and I push it out. But at this point, with some of the guests that I'm getting on the show and some of the feedback that I've been getting, I think I'm going to go ahead and make that investment. But what I didn't want to do in the beginning was to purchase all of that stuff and then suck. And then it's like, okay, what do I do with all this stuff?
You've done it long enough. So like right here, I'm not going to lie. Like this is a Yeti. So like it's $105, I think, on Amazon. The best sounding mic for under $100, at $100. That's the only thing I've got. I've got some foam insulation downstairs in my basement. And that's it. Although I will say, the last few interviews I've done, I've gone out and done in person, and I do like that. If this goes a little bit like the way I think it might. I'd like to do more of them in person, but that's a whole different thing. So,
That's
all right,
awesome.
man. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for being a guest on the show, people. You know how I do. This is going on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. SoundCloud, iTunes, on the blog, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of those things. And don't forget to check out Don's podcast, StartEdUp. And hey, you're going to get links to be able to connect with him on Twitter and all that. So people, as always, invest in you, edu. Peace.